Think forward. Think Research Channel.
There's a structural problem with genocide, which is that it tends to happen in places that are off the beaten path.
So now, in order to promote nonviolence and reduce violence, ultimately we have to address the motivation.
Society needs to acknowledge that learning is a lifelong challenge.
The sit-ins challenge cherished beliefs most whites held dearly.
At the DNA level, we're all 99.9% the same, all of us.
So individuals do matter, and I think the quality of our individual leadership matters.
Who is speaking for poor people? 40 million Americans make $6 an hour. Who is speaking for them?
The only thing that one has after throwing everything overboard is the love that one can give.
Dr. King has been identified as having a dream. Nobody seemed to remember what the dream was. Just had a dream, little children walking together up a mountain, something, whatever it was, black and white together, color of our character, we don't know what it is, just had a dream, not sure what it was. Sort of ended in '63, although he did live 5 years after that. And the other thing that is promoted about King in the mass media and in the mass culture is that he was nonviolent, and that's especially pointed to you black people to remember that King was nonviolent. So anytime you get crazy and start talking about finding any other ways of discussing anything, just remember this: King was nonviolent. We don't know what he was nonviolent about. We don't even know if he was nonviolent per se. We know that he wasn't like those black militants, those black Panthers, those black power seekers. He was nonviolent, and so you should follow that example and be nonviolent, which is really translated into being passive. And King was, of course, never passive. So the first thing I think that we have to talk about this business of who Dr. King was and the whitewashing of King. I was looking at different websites and things, and I saw that King's face has actually been lightened. Have you ever, anybody noticed that his skin is getting lighter and lighter as the years go by? And the brother that played King, I was actually shocked, because King's face seems getting lighter and lighter, and he's becoming more and more emasculated, more and more nonviolent, more and more nebulous dream. We're not sure what the dream was. So I think that, our history gets retold every 5 years or so. By the time we look at this history, if we're not careful, in another 50 or so years, King will actually have been identified as a white woman. And so that's sort of the way Condoleezza Rice identifies herself today. I wish I had written this line, but Amiri Baraka says, what kind of skeezer is Condoleezza? I love that line. It's just a great line. And the funny thing about that line is it refers to her name, and I wonder what kind of name that is. Cosby, who has denounced everybody black and poor, says that, people are naming their children ignorant, backward names in the ghetto like Shaniqua, and he also includes Muhammad, which I found interesting. Cosby talks about people's names and how black people are failing to achieve and failing to live up to the vision of Brown v. Board of Education, because it's not any problem in America. It's a problem of us not taking care of our own children, not sending our children to school, buying $500 sneakers instead of $200 hooked on phonics, whatever that means. But in any, because I'm wondering why the school system is not paying money for hooked on phonics or whatever it is that he thinks people should be learning. But I find that interesting that he would denounce black people for being too ghettoized in our names and so forth and so on, and said not a mumbling word about a woman named Condoleezza Rice, who seems to be a success model for some people, because that's about as ghetto as you can get. Condoleezza, plus it's spelled wrong, but anyway. I only say this stuff because people make me angry when they attempt to blame the victim for the crime, and we forget who Dr. King was. We've now flipped him into this sort of mamby-pamby, no-count person who really doesn't really have much to say other than to be nonviolent and stuck in the I Have a Dream speech, which he made many, many other speeches after, but also, more importantly, did something. He was not killed as a result of Memphis. He was killed because he was really doing some other more important work called the Poor People's Campaign in Washington. You know, the thing about what would Martin say that's important, because we do have to analyze this question in terms of today's society, and we could guess a lot of things about, like we could guess, given his stance against the Vietnam War, that King would probably be opposed to the war in Iraq, don't you think? I mean, it wouldn't take very much of a, of a thought process to go from Vietnam, Iraq. None of us can even justify Iraq as well as Johnson justified Vietnam, but still we, talk about save our troops, help our, well, it's not, it's about the troops, and we don't want to denounce the troops and whatever else it is, but, King talked about our need to be not politically expedient, but our need to be morally right. And so we haven't seen these voices in the pantheon of the Negroes who have a massive voice today saying a mumbling word about the war in Iraq today, but we could probably guess that King would absolutely be opposed to the war in Iraq, because there's no reason why this country, which has actually nothing to do with me, but has a lot to do with a lot of other people who think that, well, it's my country, right or wrong, think that, well, we're out there to save our troops and to help our troops, and that's what we need to focus on, as though it doesn't matter that we're killing a whole bunch of people that, as we used to say back in the day, never called us nigger. But I want to talk about what would Martin say in the context of this country now. And I want to bring us back to the moment in 1993 after Bill Clinton was elected president, whom many people, well, not many, some people, actually called the black president. Said he was the first black president. I found that interesting because I have no idea why anybody said that. I mean, I don't know, was it his lips? Why would Chris Rock, who's about as apolitical as they come, suddenly decide to make a commentary on Clinton being the first black president, and that people actually, black people voted for him with such enthusiasm, even though, of course, he had, he gave us the three strikes crime bill and the welfare reform bill and so forth and so on, but he sold that to us. Trick Daddy said, this plan wasn't told to me, it was sold to me. And that's what Clinton did. He sold the plan to all of us that the problems of black America today are not the fault of America, there's the fault of you. There's something wrong with you. And in 1993, he had the arrogance to stand in the last pulpit where Dr. King spoke in November in Memphis, Tennessee, November of '93, and asked this very same question. And he stood before a group of blacks with a black choir behind him at the church there, where King had given his famous speech, been to the mountaintop, seen the other side, might not get there with you, but I know we as a people will get there. And fearing no man tonight, I've been to the mountaintop. Here was Clinton all these years later having the arrogance, Little Rock, Arkansas, Clinton, coming up to the pulpit where Dr. King stood in the last night of his life and saying, I wonder if Dr. King were alive today. Actually, he says if Martin were alive today, as though he had been his friend. When you could see Clinton out there living 2 seconds from Central High School in Little Rock, standing out there with everybody else in the crowd throwing rocks at the Little Rock Nine. But in any case, here's Clinton talking about what would Martin say if he were standing by my side today. Now, the vision that Martin Luther King would be standing by Clinton's side is just so arrogant to me that Clinton would presume to have Martin Luther King stand by his side. And he said, and I wonder what would he say? And Clinton says, well, I believe that Martin Luther King would say, I died for your freedom, but look what you've done with it. And the black people hung their heads in shame. He hadn't even gotten finished slapping them, and they were hanging their heads in shame. Well, he died for your freedom, and look what you've done. Now, people actually hear that and don't hear the curiosity and the notion that King, first of all, didn't die. He was killed. He was actually assassinated. And anybody walking around here truly believing that James Earl Ray, who could not pass the marksman test in the Army, actually figured out how to kill Dr. King after he moved from one hotel to another, from the first floor to the second, diverted to Memphis from D.C. and so forth and so on, and figured out how to get to London and get back and get a passport. Anybody who believes all of that, I've got, a bridge in wherever those things are. So the question is to remember that Martin Luther King was assassinated. So when we remember the dream, we forget who slew the dreamer. We don't remember that, do we? We just go along saying, well, he died for our freedom. So the second problem I have with Clinton's analysis is, and you know, we used to say in the Black Panther Party, in order to come to a correct conclusion, you have to have a correct analysis. So you got at least have your facts straight. So to say that Martin Luther King died is wrong, and secondly, to die for our freedom, that meant that at some point we had been free and we had messed up our freedom. Like, you know, we had been free. After he died, we became free. And then we messed it up somewhere between 68 and 93, according to Clinton. And I found that to be curious because I was alive on April the 4th of 1968. I was alive and I lived in California at the time. And I can recall when King was killed and everybody went crazy. There were 100 uprisings in cities around this country. The black folks tore this country apart. Nonviolence is dead, it's on. That's what people talked in those days. When I woke up that morning on the 4th of April, I knew that black people in America were not free. Now, when King was assassinated, I woke up the next morning and I didn't detect any change in the status of black people from that night before, and haven't detected any since that time. So I was trying to wonder, at what point were we free that we had messed it up? Was it like around 3 o'clock a.m. on West Coast time, and I had slept through freedom? Because I know I missed it. But King died for our freedom, and look what we've done with it, said Clinton. And Clinton suggests that what we have done with our freedom in America is that we have become our own worst nightmare, our own problem. That insidious black-on-black crime, he said, and the breakdown of the black family, and of course, the worst, the unwed teen mother. And everybody was thinking, you're right, this is the problem in our community. We used to have remember people have these memories about cities that had great barbecue joints, you know, and great barber shops, and you know, little businesses, and all these little thugs are running around, these bad girls, unwed mothers walking around, names like Shaniqua and Chantrine, and all these other people walking around. And it's our fault if we're oppressed, killing each other in black-on-black criminal activity. So I began to wonder how he could make this statement without examination, because it reminded me of so many similar statements that have been made about black people. But let's just take it for what it's worth. I mean, you know, the larger number of crimes, so-called crimes committed in America, are committed by white people against white people. So actually, white-on-white crime is the more dominant. But nobody thinks of that as horrible. As a matter of fact, when we think of crime, we don't even think of white people. You know the book I've written about Little B, kid Little B, and I can recall when Little B was charged with this murder, and they said, look at him, he's a thug, a super predator. And at the same time, there was a kid in Oregon who, his name was Kip Kinkle. And Kip was 14 years old. And Kip got up one morning and he killed mom and dad, you know, stuffed them all up underneath the house, wired the house with a little bomb, put some handguns in a backpack, carried an assault rifle, taped a hunting knife to his chest, went off to school and shot up 25 of his best friends, killed 3 of them, plus mom and dad. And the next day, everybody was just so shocked that Kip had done this. And so they put a banner in front of the school, and that sort of became the headline in the newspaper, and it sort of became the theme in America during that period when a bunch of little white kids were killing, you know, Columbine and, you know, all these other little, remember there was this little burst of little killings in the schools and all. And it said, why, Kip? Why'd you do it? You know, were you feeling bad that day? Of course Kip was feeling bad. He has killed his mother and father. Are you feeling alienated? What's wrong? Is there teen angst in America? What's the problem? Now, black boy is a thug and a super predator and a criminal, hasn't even gone to trial. But Kip, we know he's killed mom and dad. We know he's killed his friends. But what's wrong, Kip? Are you feeling bad? Too many violent videos. Let's examine the media in America. We don't think of Kip, we don't think of the boys in Columbine as criminals, do we? Because crime in America is only a black thing because crime is a political question. It's not a moral question. Why isn't it a moral question? Well, because we can look at a situation like, well, let's just take Panama. When Colin Powell led Bush's troops into Panama to arrest Noriega, who had been on the CIA payroll for so long, was almost, nobody could recall when he wasn't on the CIA payroll, a known drug trafficker, went into Panama with all these troops in Black Hawk helicopters and tried to arrest Noriega, who just wasn't going to go down easy, and was eventually arrested. But in the meantime, there were 5,000 Panamanian people who were killed. We don't even talk about those people. You know why? They don't count. They're Panamanians. They're like Iraqis, irrelevant. And we certainly don't call that mass murder, do we? We haven't charged Colin Powell with mass murder. Somebody might want to. I mean, I might be one of the people who would say, order in the court, you know. But Colin Powell said, when asked about, you know, don't you think you used extraordinary force just to go in there and arrest Noriega? You could have gotten him. He didn't die, and all these other people did die. He said, I don't deal with numbers, I deal with results. But we don't think of Colin Powell as a mass murderer, or George Bush, or any of these other people. We think of little bees and all these little black children. So when Clinton tells us that black-on-black crime is one of the problems we have in America, we say, you right, Master Clinton, that's what we done. We killing each other in these drug wars, these crack wars, and so forth. Then the second thing, of course, is to break down the black family, the audacity to speak about the breakdown of the black family in the face of 250 years of slavery in which the family was so broken down and destroyed. From day one, it was almost a shame. You're lucky we can figure out how to even say the word family, much less be one, given the history of our people. And then the insidious black unwed teen mother. We know statistically that the number of teenage pregnancies in the 90s was lower than it was in many decades before. As a matter of fact, the decade that had the highest percentage of teen mothers, black or white, was the 1950s. So we just take any fact and just make something out of it. We're just going to create a problem of the black teen mother. And why did Bill Clinton do that? He did it so he could take the Newt Gingrich contract with America and run it down piece by piece. First one was, we're going to get tough on crime, and tough on crime means tough on black folks. So as a result, we get the 3-strike crime bill, or where I live in Georgia, we have a 2-strike crime bill, and that means that the population of America's prisons has increased and doubled since that bill was passed in '94. Over 2 million people, more than any other country in the world, 50% of them black. 50% black. Now, some people might say, well, there's a reason for that. Black people are the only ones committing crimes. You know? Maybe we have a criminal gene. You know, people study that. I bet you there's somebody in this room that thinks there is such a thing as a criminal gene. People in criminal studies, you know, trying to find out. They have experiments going on every day. Columbia University had an experiment on, is there a criminal gene? You know, as though crime were a biological question. I just told you crime is a political question. Because you can kill somebody in America with impunity. Coming in your house, or look like they're coming in your house, or looks like you know, the crime of walking and breathing while being Amadou Diallo. You know, you can get 41 bullets in your body, and that's not a murder, that's just excessive force. So we know that the question of crime and biology are different, but we start to buy into this stuff. You remember the Bell Curve? It was like a #1 bestseller in 1994, around the same time Clinton was passing the crime bill. And a Bell Curve written by 2 white professors, and one of them who was dead at the time of publication, Herrnstein and Murray. They assert that blacks are inherently intellectually inferior to whites. Herrnstein and Murray assert that the reason that we know this is, first of all, that intelligence can be measured. And I find this to be a curiosity, because what is the measure for intelligence? You know, I think of a welfare mother living in Georgia on $235 a month, trying to make ends meet for her child and pay rent and eat food and have a place to live and all this other stuff, and going on and making it every month as a genius. Because for me, $235 a month is not going to get it. You know, I think you're a genius. So what is it that would make you think that there was some sort of natural intelligence when we don't even have a good definition of intelligence? But you know, people buy into this. He's gifted, she's gifted. Herrnstein and Murray say that there is intelligence, that it can be measured scientifically, and that the measure for intelligence is the SAT, which I really found to be just a joke. Well, you know, in my day, the SAT was called the Scholastic Aptitude Test, as though it was some sort of test of your inherent intelligence, which we don't know about. And then it became the Scholastic Assessment Test, right? And now it's just the SAT. And you just have to take it. You don't know what it is. You just have to take it, right? You can't really describe the SAT. I have contended in the past that I could teach my dog Spot to come into the top 10% on the SAT, give me enough biscuits, 6 months of training, and I know that I'd go, okay, Spot, now, when you see this, just arbitrarily pick something, I'm gonna give you a biscuit, you just go like this, and Spot will do just as well as most people do, because the SAT measures absolutely nothing. According to Dr. Richard Atkinson, who's the president of the University of California, who no longer bothers to use the SAT as a primary measure of anybody's entrance qualifications, the only measure the SAT has is how well you take the SAT. And that's it. It's like garbage in, garbage out kind of a concept. But nevertheless, Herrnstein and Merry purport to define the SAT as a measure of intelligence, and that the failure, or the failures they would define, of blacks to be able to have the same test scores as whites consistently shows that blacks are intellectually inferior, and that this is an inherent quality with those few exceptions that they would identify, and that therefore there's no point in putting any money into public education for black people because they're too stupid to learn anyway. And that's the conclusion that they make. And if you don't know that, go ahead and read through that stuff and find it. And then a lot of black people got excited, and people were arguing, well, is the test culturally biased? Who cares? No, what is it a measure of? I'll tell you what cultural bias is. It's when we get to questions of Jefferson, which you know I have to talk about, here in Virginia, at the University of Virginia, who also felt that black people were inherently inferior in so many different ways. We talk about inherent intelligence. And so when we looked at Martin Luther King in the context of what would he say, we have to look at what is the status of black people as he did. And so we have to sort of compare one thing and the other. And today in America, in order for us, as he talks about in Where Do We Go From Here, a great speech that he made in 1967 to the SCLC convention, and talks about in order for us to know where we go from here, we have to know where we are now. Let's assess where we are. And he talks about the status of blacks in America. So in order for us to talk about what would Martin say, we have to talk about the status of America, and particularly of blacks in America. And so when we look at the prison numbers, for example, as I just mentioned, we have 1 million black people in prison in America. And not only that, many more who've been in prison and who have relatives who have somebody in prison, and it goes on and on and on. And so we look at that and we say, now, what's the problem? Is there a black criminal gene? Is there a gene what is the reason that all these people are in prison? Are they making bad choices? You know, I love the bad choice one. Are they making bad choices? Like, let me think, should I become president of the United States? Because if I really, really believe, as Nas says, I can become anything I want to become. Or are they just making bad choices about their lives and their decisions? Because this is all an individual question. And so the reason that there are 1 million black people in prison is because there's just so many more black people, and compared to the 13% population that we represent, there's just so many more black people who are running around here behaving in criminal ways. There's nothing wrong with this system. There's something wrong with these black people out here stealing and raping and doing what other things, especially rape, and all these other things that black people. And then we have the same statistic that we had in King's Day. The infant mortality rate among blacks is double that of whites. And so these black mothers must be some trifling, no count, not taking care of their children, letting their children just die, because it's double the rate. You know, the way people think that down low brother is the reason that suddenly we have an increase in the percentages of AIDS among black women. I'm not even going to get into the notion that, suddenly we're also promiscuous, and that white people are obviously not promiscuous, but we are promiscuous and we are trifling because we don't have safe sex, and black men are all gay who are lying. And so all that is the reason that there's AIDS in America. That 65% of the women in America, 65% of the children in America who have AIDS are black. There must be something wrong with black people. We're so poor. We have the highest poverty numbers. In Brunswick, Georgia, where I live now, 57% entrenched poverty. We have the lowest income, lowest education numbers, and so forth. And of course, as Cosby would say, the reason we have low education is because we're busy buying $500 sneakers instead of paying for hooks on phonics, and never one criticism about the fact that this country, in every state, makes a decision that it will spend 10 times putting someone in prison as it will on educating a child in a public school. And then we buy into the No Child Left Behind notion that, we're going to fix the schools by kicking kids out of them and taking them somewhere to some other place which we don't really have. It must be something wrong with black people if the majority of people in America who die of prostate cancer, black men die of prostate cancer at double the rate of white men. As a matter of fact, black men in America have the highest percentage of prostate cancer in the world. Obviously something wrong, bad choices about food, obviously eating too many chitlins or something like this, because that must be the reason that you have prostate cancer in these numbers, and black women have cervical cancer at double the rate and die of it at double the rate of white women. Breast cancer, same thing. Must be something wrong with black people that we can't seem to find a way to own our own homes. Nothing wrong with America. There's opportunity, there's land of opportunity. If you believe in yourself, you believe in God, you will have everything you want. So it's obvious the majority of people black people are not believing in themselves and not believing in God or whatever it is they're not believing in, because we have the lowest home ownership numbers in America, and of course the highest foreclosure rates. And then we have family wealth, like 16 cents of every dollar compared to white wealth, and then finally less than 1% of all businesses in America, business revenues in America come from black business, which tells us that we're also not industrious, not smart, not able to create a business, and so forth. Now, either we believe that there must be something wrong with black people because everything else is okay. The playing field is even, and as Clinton said, or as I guess it was Dinesh D'Souza or whatever, came in and said, there's no more racism. So what's the problem? You're not trying hard enough. You're criminal, black on black crime, unwed teen mother, break down the black family. Something wrong with black people in America, and it certainly must be genetic. Now, in order to talk about what Martin would say about that, we might want to talk about what Martin did say about it, about the conditions of black people that were so similar back in 1967 and 68, and we do know that he was planning a Poor People's March. And what was he planning to do? He's planning to go to Washington, D.C. and said, come one, come all, black, white, poor, white, Native American, gay, straight, Mexican, women, men, whatever, whosoever will let him come, because we're going to cash our check. We're going to get reparations, we're going to get a guaranteed income, and we're going to talk about the redistribution of the wealth of this nation, because you cannot have a nation in which this many people live at the bottom of society after having built up the society at this level, and be talking about that we are free. And how can we talk about sending young men to fight for freedom in other countries, to kill people in the name of freedom in other countries, to use violence to resolve conflict, and then come here and do nothing about the status of a large percentage of people in America. And so he says, and where do we go from here? With all the struggle and all the achievements, we must face the fact that the Negro still lives in the bottom of the great society, still impoverished aliens in an affluent society. And then going on to recall the slavery and the contributions that blacks have made, he says, now in order to answer the question, where do we go from here, we must first honestly recognize where we are. And so, when we talk about where do we go from here, let's figure out where we are. The Black Panther Party comes into being, SNCC, a number of other organizations that were not distinct as black power groups versus militant versus nonviolent, all of that. We were all in the freedom movement. It was about freedom and liberation. So when we talk about what would Martin Luther King Jr. say today, we have to analyze where we are today. And we have to know that he would still be calling for freedom. He did talk about reparations and a guaranteed income and the redistribution of wealth. And he made a commitment to that kind of change. He threw down his life, and he absolutely did get killed because he gave his life to the people. And so we have to then make some sort of a commitment in the name of Martin Luther King to get back to this question of freedom, to put freedom back on our agenda so that we can guarantee that all people will have everything that they need so that they can not only have the opportunity but in fact have life, liberty, and happiness.